It was the kind of morning that felt like it had always been. The sun filtered gently through the curtains of Tiana's small apartment, casting a warm, golden light over everything. She moved through her routine, methodical and quiet, like she always did. Making coffee, picking out clothes for work, skimming through her emails. In the background, her thoughts were wrapped in the same dull haze, the kind you'd feel when something feels just slightly off, but you can't quite figure out what it is. She glanced at the family portrait hanging crookedly on the wall beside her desk. The smiling woman in the center was her mother. The man beside her mother was supposed to be her father. She didn't remember him, but his image lingered in the frame, blurry and distant. Her father. Tiana didn't think much about him anymore, not the way she used to. After all, her mother had told her all the answers, and it was easier that way, just to let the questions fade into the background of her life. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, she would find herself staring at that photo. The man's face remained just out of focus in her memories, and yet he felt absent. He felt like a question waiting for an answer she never dared to ask. It wasn't until an ordinary evening, much like any other, that something finally disturbed the surface of her placid life. Tiana was sorting through old boxes in the attic, boxes she had ignored for years. They were filled with her mother's old letters, photographs, and keepsakes from a life before Tiana had come into the world. As her fingers brushed against an old leather-bound envelope, she paused. It wasn't like the others. It was sealed with the kind of official wax that made her think of legal matters, serious business. Curiosity piqued, she slid her finger under the seal and unfolded the letter. It was addressed in her mother's handwriting, but what she saw inside made her heart stop. The words were cold, clinical. Legal jargon that made her pulse quicken as she read them. Rape trial. Father. And then, a name. Her biological father's name. Tiana's throat tightened, and she nearly dropped the letter. She had heard rumors, but never like this, never a connection to such a dark reality. She thought she might be imagining it, but no. The document was real. Her world seemed to tilt, just slightly. The weight of the words on the paper felt suffocating, and yet Tiana couldn't put it down. She read them again, more slowly this time. Her father wasn't just absent, he was tied to a crime, to an act of violence. It was all too much. She had to know more. But the thought of asking her mother, her protective, loving mother, was terrifying. The truth was no longer a distant possibility. It had just slammed into her life, unexpected, demanding answers. But Tiana had no idea how to even begin looking for them. The next day, Tiana couldn't bring herself to look at her mother the same way. She was no longer the woman who had always comforted her, promised her that everything would be okay. Now, she was the keeper of secrets, the one who had shielded Tiana from this truth her entire life. It wasn't long before Tiana found herself sitting at the kitchen table, her hands gripping the letter tightly as her mother hummed softly in the background, preparing dinner. There was a strange calmness to the scene, but Tiana couldn't shake the storm brewing inside her. "Mom," she said, her voice low but urgent. "What's this? Why didn't you tell me?" Her mother turned slowly, her face pale. The warm, motherly smile that usually graced her face faltered. She hadn't expected this moment to come. "Tiana, Her voice broke. "I wanted to protect you. From all of it." "From all of it." Tiana's chest tightened at the words. "You should have told me the truth," Tiana replied, feeling a mixture of anger and betrayal, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "You should have let me know who he really was." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "I thought it was better this way. You had a life, a good life. I didn't want you to grow up thinking that the man who should have loved you was capable of something unforgivable." Tiana's mind spun. There was so much pain in her mother's words, but there was also something else, fear. Fear that was decades old. Tiana didn't know where to begin. But she had to know. She had to know who the man was, why he had done what he did, and why it was all hidden from her. She visited the local library, going through archives and legal records that dated back years. Each document she uncovered brought her closer to the painful reality that her father's past was full of darkness, things she could never have imagined as a child. As Tiana sifted through articles about the trial, she came across photos of her father. Not the blurry image from the photo frame at home, but a younger, more vivid man. His face, though unfamiliar, was undeniably hers. He was unmistakably her father. But there was no joy in the discovery. His crimes had sealed his fate. He was not a hero, not a man she could look to for understanding, but a ghost from her past. A man who had left her not because of distance or choice, but because of something more sinister. She went to see him. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the need for closure, or perhaps it was something deeper, a primal need to face the truth, even if it was painful. The place he lived was run down, and when he answered the door, Tiana felt the weight of years on his shoulders. The man in front of her wasn't the father she had imagined in her dreams. He was old now, weathered by life, but his eyes were still filled with the same guilt that had haunted her mother's face for years. "I'm your daughter," Tiana said, her voice trembling, unsure of what she expected him to say. She had rehearsed the moment in her mind 100 times, but now that she stood before him, all her preparations seemed insignificant. "I know who you are," he said quietly. "I don't deserve to be your father. I don't deserve anything. I never wanted to hurt you. But I did. And for that, I'm sorry." The words were hollow, like a promise made too late. Tiana wanted to scream, to ask him why. Why had he done it? But she didn't. She was no longer looking for answers in him. She was looking for answers in herself. In the days that followed, Tiana felt the burden of what she had learned settle inside her like a stone. But instead of it crushing her, it gave her clarity. She had the power to define who she was, and she would not let the sins of her father dictate her future. She could forgive her mother, and perhaps even herself. But the truth had given her a new sense of agency, of self-understanding. And that was more powerful than anything she could have imagined. The answers had come, but Tiana didn't need to carry the weight of them forever. She would walk forward, stronger for knowing who she was, even if the story was painful. Healing was a choice, and Tiana was ready to choose it.